In recent months, Nigeria's inflation rate has occasionally shown signs of slowing. But for millions of Nigerians, life still feels more expensive than ever. Food is expensive, transportation is expensive, rent is expensive. Much of this pressure intensified after major economic changes in recent years, including the removal of fuel subsidies and the depreciation of the naira. Across the country, many households feel the same reality. Life simply costs more than it used to. So how can inflation sometimes appear to be slowing, while everyday prices continue to rise? Are prices really stabilizing? Or are we misunderstanding what inflation actually measures? In this episode of Nigerianomics, we are going to unpack what inflation really means, how it is measured, and why Nigeria's inflation numbers changed after the country rebased its inflation statistics. By the end of this episode, you'll understand three things that many people misunderstand about inflation. First, why lower inflation does not mean prices are falling. Second, how a mathematical formula used by economists determines the inflation number you hear in the news. And third, why Nigeria's recent inflation rebasing changed the official numbers, even though everyday prices did not suddenly become cheaper. Inflation is one of the most frequently used economic terms, but it is also one of the most misunderstood. Many people assume inflation simply means that things are expensive, but that is not actually correct. Inflation does not mean prices are high. Inflation means prices are rising. More precisely, inflation is the rate at which the general price level of goods and services increases over time. A key concept here is the difference between the price level and the inflation rate. The price level refers to how expensive things already are. The inflation rate measures how quickly those prices are changing. Even when inflation falls, prices can still continue rising. For example, if inflation drops from 25% to 10%, prices are still increasing, just more slowly than before. This is why people can still feel that life is getting more expensive even when the inflation rate is falling. Inflation refers to changes across the entire economy, not just the price of a single product. If the price of tomatoes doubles because of a poor harvest, that alone is not inflation. But if food, transport, rent, electricity, healthcare, and school fees are all rising across the economy, then the general price level is increasing. That is inflation. Nigeria has experienced several periods of high inflation in the past. In the mid-1990s, inflation exceeded 70%, one of the highest levels recorded in the country's economic history. Understanding the difference between price levels and inflation rates is the first step to understanding how economies work. Why inflation matters. Inflation is not just an economic statistic. It directly affects how people live. One of the most immediate effects of inflation is on purchasing power. When prices rise faster than wages, the same income can buy fewer goods and services. In other words, money loses value. For example, if a worker earns 150,000 naira per month and inflation is running at 25% per year, that salary will buy fewer essentials than it did the previous year. Inflation also affects household spending patterns. Lower income households tend to spend a larger share of their income on food. When food prices rise sharply, the impact on these households is often severe. Fuel prices also play a major role in Nigeria's inflation dynamics because transportation costs affect almost every stage of production and distribution. Increases in fuel prices can quickly spread throughout the economy. Businesses are affected as well. When inflation becomes unpredictable, companies struggle to plan costs, set prices, and make long-term investments. Nigeria also experiences what economists call imported inflation. Because Nigeria relies heavily on imported goods and raw materials, a weaker naira increases the cost of those imports. When import costs rise, businesses often pass those higher costs onto consumers through higher prices. Inflation therefore affects wages, savings, investment decisions, and economic stability. It also influences how policymakers respond to economic challenges. So, how do economists actually measure inflation? Most countries measure inflation using something called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. In Nigeria, inflation statistics are compiled and published every month by the National Bureau of Statistics. The CPI tracks the cost of a representative basket of goods and services that households typically consume. The concept of measuring inflation using a price index dates back more than a century. During the First World War, governments needed a systematic way to track how rapidly the cost of living was rising. Statistical agencies began constructing price indices to measure the cost of basic household goods. Over time, these systems evolved into the modern CPI frameworks used around the world today. Behind the inflation number is a mathematical framework. Inflation is not calculated by simply averaging price changes. Instead, economists use a weighted price index. Each item in the consumer basket is multiplied by how important it is in a household spending. Those weighted prices are then compared with the same basket in a base year. This allows economists to calculate how the overall cost of living changes over time. To understand this more clearly, imagine a simple basket with 3 items: bread, transport, phone data. Bread rises from 500 naira to 600 naira. Transport rises from 300 naira to 360 naira. Phone data rises from 100 naira to 110 naira. Because bread and transport represents a larger share of household spending, they carry heavier weights. When these weighted changes are combined, the overall inflation rate in this example is approximately 18%. In reality, Nigeria's CPI basket contains more than 900 product varieties, but the principle is exactly the same. Nigeria's Consumer Price Index follows an international classification system known as COI-COP. This system divides household spending into major categories such as food and non-alcoholic beverages, housing and utilities, transport, health, education, communication, recreation, restaurants and accommodation services, insurance and financial services, personal care, and miscellaneous goods. Food alone accounts for roughly half of the total weight in Nigeria's CPI basket. This is why changes in food prices have such a powerful influence on overall inflation. Every month, statisticians collect hundreds of price observations across markets, shops, schools, hospitals, and service providers across Nigeria. These price observations are then combined to measure how the cost of living changes over time. For many years, Nigeria used CPI weights based on the 2003 to 2004 Nigeria Living Standard Survey. The CPI system also used a base year of 2009. Under that framework, the inflation basket contained about 740 goods and services. Prices were collected monthly from thousands of outlets, and data was gathered from over 10,000 informants across urban and rural areas. Over time, however, this framework became outdated because economies evolved. Consumption patterns change, and statistical systems must evolve with them. To address these changes, Nigeria updated its CPI framework through a process known as rebasing. Rebasing simply means updating the statistical system used to measure inflation. Most countries periodically update their CPI baskets because household spending patterns change as economies develop. Several major changes were introduced. The base year was updated to 2024. The basket expanded from 740 items to more than 900 product varieties. The classification system was updated to align with COI/COP 2018 standards, and the number of CPI divisions increased from 12 to 13 categories. These updates ensure inflation statistics reflect modern consumption patterns, including spending on digital services, telecommunications, and other emerging categories. When the rebased CPI system was introduced, Nigeria's inflation rate appeared to decline. But this does not mean prices suddenly became cheaper. What changed was the measurement framework. A useful analogy is measuring height. If you change the ruler you use, the number you read may change, even though the object itself remains the same. Similarly, when Nigeria updated its CPI methodology, it effectively changed the ruler used to measure inflation. Rebasing changes how inflation is measured, not the prices people actually pay. Economists rarely rely on a single inflation number. Instead, they analyze several indicators. Headline inflation reflects the overall change in prices across the entire basket. Food inflation tracks the cost of food items, which are particularly important in Nigeria because of their large share in household spending. Core inflation excludes volatile items such as food and energy in order to reveal underlying inflation trends. By comparing these indicators, economists can better understand the forces driving inflation in the economy. But inflation statistics are not always the same as lived experience. Even when inflation slows, households may still feel financial pressure. Because slower inflation does not mean prices are falling, it simply means prices are rising more slowly than before. Inflation is one of the most powerful forces shaping economic life. It influences wages, savings, business decisions, and government policy. But it is also the result of a complex measurement system. Behind every inflation number are thousands of price observations, hundreds of goods and services, and a statistical system designed to measure how the cost of living evolves across an entire economy. My name is Adeola Komolafe Oluem, and this is Nigerianomics. If you found this episode useful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if there are other economic questions about Nigeria you would like us to explore, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching.